In Week 5, the Las Vegas Raiders will travel to Denver for a divisional matchup against the Broncos. Both of these teams are coming off big wins that got them to 2-2 on the season. If at any point you enjoy this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up as it helps the channel. Let's get into the game preview. So as always with these previews, I do have a key I use to grade each of these players, and then each player will be color coded based off of how I currently have them rated. These ratings do change throughout the season. Obviously I do Raiders content, so you'll probably already see a lot of Raiders grades have changed as guys have went up and down, and then same with the Broncos. By the next time you see another Broncos preview, a lot of these players will probably move up or down. But this is just currently where I have them graded. So just to go over again how I do grade the players, pink would be elite. So if you look at it on a 0 to 100 scale, this is a 90 to 100. Blue is star players. These are players, maybe they're not top 5 or 10 at the position, but they're still extremely good players and players you definitely want on your team, players you want to build around. Maybe these are young rising stars or just players that have always been really good throughout their career. Again, this would be like an 80 to an 89 on that scale. And then green is the solid starters, guys you're not looking to move on from. Maybe they've been there for a long time. Maybe they're rookies, but they're really showing a lot as a rookie. And these are a 70 to a 79 on that scale. Then you have, your average starters, maybe not necessarily looking to move on from them, but if a chance to upgrade would come up, you would upgrade from them. And then you have below average or worse. So these are players, if they don't step up, they're probably going to get replaced in the offseason or possibly even benched this year. So now that that's out of the way, let's start with this Broncos defense. And more specifically, let's start with the pass rush. These guys have been really good in terms of blitzing this year. And when you look at what they've been able to do recently, Baker Mayfield sacked 7 times. They really beat up on that Buccaneers offensive line. And then the next week against the Jets, Aaron Rodgers sacked 4 times, 31.6 QBR. I mean, these guys are really beating up on quarterbacks. And it's not just the defensive line themselves. Vance Joseph is really dialing up some heat. He's kind of, I don't want to say coming out of his shell because he's been in the league a long time, but he's had some down years, I feel like, the past few years. And this year he's really just letting it all loose. And I think a lot of that is due to the secondary and their ability to cover. So let's move on to the secondary. Aaron Rodgers threw the ball 42 times, 225 yards, only 5 yards per attempt. And as I said, quarterback rating of 31.6, that's not very good. When you look at his top receivers, they held Garrett Wilson to less than 10 yards a catch. He only caught the ball 5 times. Now, granted, this was an ugly game, but just a really good performance out of the unit as a whole. The pass rush was getting there, the blitzes were getting there, and again, the secondary just really good in coverage. Pat Surtain, we all know he's elite, but what Riley Moss has been able to do this season has been super impressive, really breaking out. And it would really be something if he kind of became an elite player as well. You'd have 2 elite corners on the outside. And then you have McMillan manning the slot, who's been a really solid player. So this secondary, I don't know if it's necessarily underrated. I think people know they're good. But yeah, just a really, really solid secondary, and probably a top 5 secondary in the NFL right now. Now, in terms of the Raiders offense, last week they were finally able to get their ground game going. You got guys like Jackson Powers-Johnson. He stepped in against the Panthers but made his first start against the Browns and he looked legit. Dylan Parham, since moving to right guard this year, has probably been the Raiders' best offensive lineman. Colton Miller struggled a little bit. You can see I put him down from star to solid. I do think he gets back up to star, but right now you can tell he's just still not 100% healthy. The shoulder's bothering him. He's actually been one of their worst offensive linemen. And then Andre James has been the worst in my opinion. He did look better against the Browns. I think there's something to work with there. but really struggled to start the season, and you would think that he would look better in a zone scheme than he did previously in power, but hasn't been the case yet. But we'll see how that goes. So yeah, their rushing offense looks so much better. They ran for over 150 yards against the Browns. Zamir White, still not there for me. And you can see I have him as a poor player. I didn't mean to keep Madison as poor when I was making this. He should be more in the average starter range as of right now, but could possibly get an upgrade. Madison only carried the ball 5 times, but he had 60 yards. He was breaking tackles. He looked really good running through contact. He found the holes in zone, which is something Zamir White hasn't done. And then Trey Tucker and DJ Turner both got carries as well. They both scored touchdowns, so you're seeing a little creativity in the run game to get it going. You had McAllister get a carry or two on some pitch plays. So yeah, Luke Getzey's kind of getting creative with the run game. But let's address the elephant in the room quickly. Davante Adams no longer on the screen. He apparently wants out of Las Vegas. I think the Raiders kind of want to move on too. Jacoby Myers steps into that wide receiver 1 role. I believe he had 5 catches last week, like something like 5 catches for 50 yards, something along those lines. Wasn't a superstar or anything like that, but he was targeted 10 times, so you do know that they are trying to get him the ball. Brock Bowers only had 2 catches and an ugly drop, but again, somebody they want to get the ball to, probably their go-to guy now that without Davante Adams. And let's not try to make things up and say that this offense is better without Adams. I've seen people saying that. They had one okay game where they scored 20 points, but you take one of the best wide receivers in the NFL off of an offense, it doesn't make them a better team. So we can stop with that. But really what I'm looking for with the Raiders is, do they keep their run game going? And does Gardner Minshew play any better? He had 130 yards last week, kind of played that game manager role, but he also left a ton on the table. He missed at least 3 throws that I can think of off the top of my head. So looking for him to play better, but it's going to be tough, like I talked about with this secondary. So when you look at some of these matchups, I don't think Jacoby Myers is going to be able to get away from Pat Surtain. When the reps he had against Denzel Ward last week, he didn't get free at all. So, that's a concerning matchup on the Raiders end, and something the Broncos probably feel pretty good about. You got Riley Moss, and I'm not saying Surtain will be on Myers the whole game. Obviously, they move these guys around, but Riley Moss, Trey Tucker, they'll have to use Tucker's speed to his advantage, could take a couple deep shots, but again, Riley Moss is a pretty good player. And then they're obviously going to use a combination of things to try to stop Brock Bowers. So McMillan might be on him, might put some of the linebackers on him. But yeah, we'll see what happens. Interesting matchup, but I would definitely give the advantage to the Broncos defense in this case. So moving over to the other side with the Broncos offense and the Raiders defense, we'll start with the Broncos once again. In the 2 wins, Bo Nix has thrown for less than 300 combined yards in both those games. Now granted, the Jets game was a little weird, the weather was strange, but again, just a bad performance by him in that game. But let's start with the Bucs game. He threw for 216, 6 yards per attempt, probably one of his better games of the season, maybe his best. And you notice the last 2 games when they've been winning, he's been throwing less. In their first 2 games, I really didn't like the recipe there with Sean Payton making a rookie quarterback come in and throw the ball all over the yard. That's really not necessarily a way to be successful. But let's talk about the Broncos running game. It got going against the Jets. It got going against the Bucs. And really what they're doing is a committee approach, and the offensive line's playing pretty well in terms of run blocking, with their best players obviously being Garrett Bowles, Ben Powers, Quinn Miners. Miners being one of the best guards in the NFL. But, Tyler Beatty, kind of takes over in the Bucs game. Bo Nix is running the football pretty well on scrambles. Javonte Williams, Jaleel McLaughlin, both solid players. I have them listed here as kind of that split starter role. But if you go to the Bucs game, Tyler Beatty was kind of the back that was getting the yards. And if you go to the Jets game, they kind of went back to Javonte Williams. He got 16 carries in that game, averaged 5 a pop. And then McLaughlin got 9. He averaged 5 a pop. Beatty gets 1 carry. Not sure if that was injury related. I haven't seen the report yet, but you guys can fact check me on that. And then Bo Nix in the Jets game we have to talk about a little bit. He did throw his first touchdown, which I'm sure people were excited to see, but less than 50% completion, only 60 yards. Definitely need to grow on that. And again, I know the rain did play a factor in that, but at one point he had negative passing yards at halftime or something like that. So and I'm not completely blaming Bo Nix because, one, I don't think his weapons are the best. And 2, I do think that Sean Payton needs to do a better job of scheming guys open and getting the ball out of Bo Nix's hands quick. So yeah, we'll stop there with the Broncos offense. I think their keys would be run the ball, play action, get easy throws. That would be a path to success for them. But again, if we're looking the same way I gave the advantage to the Broncos defense, I'm going to give the advantage on this side to the Raiders defense. When you look up front, even if Crosby's out, which I think the smart thing for the Raiders to do would be to hold Crosby out. Wilson had his best game of the year. I did upgrade him from below average to average. His bull rush wasn't so stale anymore. He was extending his arms and getting, some push on these guys. Previously, he would run right into him like a car crash, right? But now he's using that length. He needs to do a better job of shedding the block after he uses his length, but he's pushing guys back into quarterback. He obviously had a really good play where he timed the snap, and Deshaun Watson had a wide open guy, but because Wilson was able to time the snap, he was able to get there and mess up that throw. Adam Butler had maybe the best game of his career. He had 7 pressures in that game, was just wreaking havoc. And as the spiker on stunts, so the spiker is the guy that is kind of taking people out for the guy to loop around. When he was the spiker on stunts, he was super violent, just crashing into dudes, freeing up Christian Wilkins on the inside. And then, as we know, Charles Snowden had 2 back-to-back really good plays where he had a batted ball at the end of the game and then the sack to win it. But again, on that sack, he had to win it. Butler and Wilkins absolutely crashed the middle. There was nowhere to step up. Watson had to scramble out, and Snowden made a good effort play. And then, in terms of the linebacking core on the Raiders defense, I'm worried about Luke Masterson starting again with Diablo still hurt. He's been really bad. He's had some okay reps in the run game, but teams are just throwing right over his head in the pass game, and it's definitely something Sean Payton's taken note of. He just looks lost in pass coverage. Moving on from him though, Isaiah Polamau, awesome player. He's definitely better than Marcus Epps. I think they were starting Marcus Epps for communication purposes, but Polamau is just way better athlete, way better at tackling in space, and way better as the cover 1 deep player. This dude is flying from one side of the field to the other. It's really impressive to see. I mean, this Raiders defense has been solid. I don't think they've been as good as anticipated coming into the season, but dealing with injuries, things like that. You have Jacorian Bennett going to solid starter with Jack Jones being downgraded to average. Bennett has been the better of the two, and especially last game, Jack Jones could have gave up another huge play again if Tyree Wilson hadn't came flying off the edge and disrupted that flow. But Jacorian Bennett has not allowed really anything this year. He's been a super impressive player. So again, I give the advantage here to the Raiders defense. I just need to see it from Sean Payton and Bo Nix before I kind of give them an advantage in any kind of game. And then moving on to the coaching, you have Antonio Pierce, who's dealing with this interesting dynamic of the Devontae Adams situation, trying to keep the locker room together through that. He's 7-6 as a head coach, which probably would surprise some people if they haven't been paying attention to the Raiders. He has a winning record. He was 5-4 last year as an interim. He's 2-2 this year. His offensive coordinator, Luke Getsy, wants to be that wide zone, Shanahan, play action type system. Hasn't worked thus far, but I do think his offensive linemen are better tuned to do the zone scheme than Power. I think Zamir White needs to do a better job of finding holes, and then some of his schematics blocking wise, where he has, wide receivers trying to reach block defensive ends. Like, some of that needs to get cleaned up in order for them to have success. Patrick Graham being the defensive coordinator, very disguise heavy. Last week we saw a lot of cover one out of him, a lot of blitzing, but at his core, he really is a disguise heavy zone guy. But this season he has mixed it up with a lot of blitzes, a lot of man-to-man, and he's a week-to-week coordinator. He'll do whatever it takes to stop the other offense, and he's really become one of the best defensive coordinators in the NFL. Now with Sean Payton, obviously he's a Super Bowl winning head coach. See it there, 169 career wins. Hasn't had success with the Broncos yet, but it's early, still building this team, still developing a young quarterback. Joe Lombardi comes over to be his offensive coordinator, but with Sean Payton's offense, he'll be calling the plays. Then you have Vance Joseph, who like I said, has kind of revitalized his career this season, kind of found himself again. Really like what he's been doing with the pass rush. With the corners he has, he's saying, I trust these corners, sending a lot of cover zero. I think they pressured Aaron Rodgers on like 50% of his dropbacks last week. But yeah, really interesting coaching matchup. And again, just one of two really good defensive coordinators and two offenses that are struggling. We'll have to see how that goes. So that's going to do it, guys. I do hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, consider subscribing to the channel. I do game previews every week. We do film reviews after each game. So yeah, if you enjoy the content, subscribe. I appreciate you if you stuck around to this point, and I will see you in the next one.